Instructor Ven Solari had 4 arms, and not a single one of them was doing what she needed. 2 were sorting data tablets into species-coded stacks. 1 was wiping nutrient paste off Console 3, where a Veldari larvae had already managed to spill breakfast. And the 4th was trembling in a way she refused to acknowledge. 40 juveniles from 11 species were about to walk through that door, and Ven's double hearts were doing something closer to jazz than a rhythm. She checked her seating chart for the 9th time. The Galactic Education Board had designed the arrangement with the same care a bomb disposal unit uses to handle unstable chemicals. Herbivores clustered left near the exits, because 10,000 years of evolution do not vanish because someone invented interstellar travel. Insectoids rear center, where their pheromone signals would dissipate before reaching the sensitive nasal membranes of the mammalian species. Mid-tier omnivores scattered through the middle rows like a buffer zone made of children. And then there was the back corner. 1 desk, solo. 3 empty seats around it, in every direction, like a quarantine perimeter. That seat belonged to the Arxer cub. Ven had read his file 7 times. Kale Vreth, 14 cycles, Dominion-class predator, feline-reptilian hybrid species, 6-limbed, armored along the spine and forearms, claws retractable but present, jaw structure capable of cracking the femur bone of a fully grown Granthi. He was part of the post-ceasefire integration program, selected specifically because he was considered docile by Arxer standards. Docile by Arxer standards meant he had only bitten 2 people. Ven's 4 hands kept sorting tablets, and she kept not thinking about that jaw. The students arrived in waves. The herbivore children came first, because herbivore parents were the anxious kind, who brought their kids 30 minutes early and checked the air filtration twice. Then the insectoids, clicking and buzzing in their cluster language, antennae mapping the room before their legs had crossed the threshold. Then the mid-tiers, slouching, distracted, already bored. Kale arrived alone. He was smaller than Ven had expected, and that somehow made it worse. He moved with the careful economy of something that knew exactly how much damage it could do, and was trying very hard not to. His scales were dark gray, almost black, and they caught the overhead lights in a way that made them look wet. His eyes were slitted and golden, and they swept the room in one pass. Every student in the classroom shifted, not dramatically, not a stampede, just a collective lean, a few degrees of rotation in the spine, a turning away so subtle that only a prey species would recognize it. Ven recognized it. She had been doing it her entire life. Kale walked to the back corner, sat at his solo desk, placed his bag on the floor with a gentleness that looked practiced, like he had been taught that every motion he made was being watched and measured. The 3 empty seats around him stayed empty. Ven exhaled through both her nasal slits and picked up the morning's lesson plan. And then the door opened one more time. The human girl was late, not dramatically late, not burst through the door late, just late enough that every head turned. Mira dos Santos was 12 years old by Earth standard counting, small for her species. Dark curly hair held back with a blue pen shoved through it like a structural support beam. She wore the standard academy uniform with the sleeves rolled up, and a bandage on her left knee that looked fresh. She carried a bag covered in small metal pins that depicted earth animals Ven could not identify. Ven's double hearts did the jazz thing again. She had never been in the same room as a human before. She had read the files. Every instructor in the integration program had read the files. The files were the reason 3 members of the faculty board had requested transfers before the term began. Humans, persistence predators, binocular vision optimized for tracking, cardiovascular systems designed for pursuit across distances that made Ven's legs ache just reading about them. Bones that healed stronger after breaking, which was a fact so fundamentally unfair that Ven had filed a formal complaint with the universe the first time she read it. They sweated to regulate heat, so they never had to stop moving. They consumed chemical irritants for entertainment. They had domesticated apex predators through sheer stubbornness. And this one was 12, and had a pen in her hair and a bandage on her knee. Mira stood in the doorway and scanned the room. Not the way the herbivore children had scanned it, looking for exits. Not the way the insectoids had scanned it, mapping pheromone trails. Scans the cafeteria looking for where to sit. Her eyes moved across the herbivore cluster, the insectoid section, the mid-tier rows. They stopped on the back corner, on the 3 empty seats, on Kale, sitting alone, his golden eyes fixed forward, his 6 limbs perfectly still, his armored body radiating the kind of stillness that says, "I know you are all afraid of me, and I have accepted it." Mira walked toward him. Ven's 4 hands froze. The data tablets stopped sorting. The nutrient paste stopped being wiped. Everything stopped. The classroom went vacuum silent. The herbivore children pressed closer together. The insectoid antennae went rigid. Even the mid-tier omnivores, who had been performing boredom like a competitive sport, looked up. Mira walked past the empty buffer seats, past the invisible line that every other student had treated like a force field. She stopped at the chair directly beside Kale Vreth, Dominion-class predator, jaw built for bone, claws built for worse. She dropped her bag. It hit the floor with a thud that sounded like a punctuation mark at the end of something Ven could not yet read. Kale turned one slitted golden eye toward the girl. His jaw did not move. His claws stayed retracted. But something in the angle of his neck changed. A tilt so small that only a predator or a prey species watching a predator would notice. Mira pulled the pen from her hair. Her curls fell across one shoulder. She clicked the pen. Once, twice. "Is this seat taken?" Her voice was light, casual. The voice of someone asking about a seat, and not about 10,000 years of interspecies terror. Then opened her mouth. Protocol required her to intervene. The seating chart existed for a reason. The buffer zone existed for a reason. Her training, her files, her 4 trembling hands all told her to say something, to redirect, to put the human girl in the mid-tier section where she technically belonged. Kale answered first. His voice was small, too small for something that size, too soft for a species that had conquered 3 star systems before the ceasefire. "No." Mira sat down, clicked her pen one more time, opened her data tablet. Ven stood at the front of the classroom with 4 arms hanging at her sides, and 40 students staring, and a seating chart that had just become irrelevant. The chair beside the most dangerous juvenile in the room was no longer empty. The human girl had chosen it. Kale Vreth had a system for everything. It was not a complicated system. It was the system every Arxer learned before they could walk. You look at a thing and you sort it. Threat, or prey, or obstacle, or irrelevant. 4 categories. Clean and simple, and it had kept his species alive for longer than most civilizations had existed. He sorted the human girl on the first day. Small frame. Approximately 60% of his body mass. No visible claws, no venom glands, no armored plating, no electroreception. Blunt teeth designed for a mixed diet, which meant her species could not even commit to being one kind of dangerous. Soft skin that bruised when she bumped a desk. She had a bandage on her knee from tripping on the docking ramp, which he had watched happen from 20 meters away with both eyes and all the judgment his species could produce. Category: irrelevant. He filed her away and went back to the business of being alone in a room full of people. That lasted about 6 hours. The first week of the academic cycle introduced the species biology module, which was the Galactic Education Board's way of saying, "We are going to make everyone in this room uncomfortable, and call it learning." Each species was profiled: strengths, weaknesses, evolutionary history, threat classification. The Arxer profile went first, because alphabetical ordering is cruel. Kale sat through the presentation of his own species, like someone watching their home security footage played in public. Apex predator, conquest-oriented social hierarchy, 4 confirmed system invasions before the ceasefire. Bite force sufficient to sever most known biological materials. The other students looked at him the way they always looked at him, with that practiced blend of fear and courtesy that made his stomach turn. He was used to it. Then the projector loaded the human dossier. The room changed. Change when an ARCSR profile loads. That quick collective flinch. It changed the way a room changes when the floor tilts and everyone grabs for something solid. Humans were persistence predators. The phrase sat on the screen, and Kale read it 3 times, because the words individually made sense, but together they described something that should not exist. A persistence predator did not chase and catch. It chased and followed and followed and followed until the thing it was chasing simply could not run anymore. Its heart gave out, its legs failed. It collapsed from exhaustion, and the human walked up to it, breathing calmly. And that was that. They did this on foot, across entire continents, for days. Kale looked at the girl sitting beside him. She was doodling a small 4-legged earth creature on her data tablet, with the pen she kept in her hair. She had her tongue between her teeth, the way she did when she was concentrating on something that did not matter. The projector kept going. Human bones healed denser after fracture. Their bodies treated damage as a renovation opportunity. They regulated internal temperature through liquid excretion from their skin, which meant their cooling system was built into their surface, which meant they never had to stop to rest. They consumed capsaicin, a chemical compound that triggered pain receptors, and they did this deliberately, repeatedly, and competitively. A Thyraxi student in the front row raised a trembling arm. They eat pain? Mira looked up from her doodle. We call it hot sauce. It is good on almost everything. The Thyraxi student put her arm down very carefully. The projector displayed the final section of the human dossier, and Kale felt something shift in his chest that he did not have a word for. Humans had domesticated wolves. Not hunted, not killed, not driven to extinction. Domesticated. They had taken an apex predator species. With jaws and pack tactics and territorial aggression. And they had said, yes, this one is mine now. And they had done it not through dominance or force, but through the most ARCSR incomprehensible strategy Kale had ever encountered. They had simply refused to leave. Generation after generation, they stayed. They shared food. They slept beside the wolves, and the wolves slept beside them, and somewhere in that process, the wolves stopped being wolves and started being something else. Something that looked at a human and saw pack, saw family, saw mine. Kale looked at the girl beside him again. She had finished her doodle. The 4-legged creature had pointed ears and a curled tail. Under it, she had written a word in Earth script that he could not read. What is that? He asked. A dog, she said. They are the best thing my species ever made. Kale understood with a clarity that vibrated in his bones that he was not sitting next to something irrelevant. He was sitting next to the species that tamed wolves by being too stubborn to walk away. The group project assignments came that afternoon. Kale and Mira were paired together because no other student would voluntarily share a workstation with either of them, which was its own kind of comedy. Their assigned topic was Comparative Apex Survival Strategies, which was the Education Board's way of saying, please discuss your capacity for violence in academic terms. They worked well together in the way that 2 sharp things work well together, carefully. Kale provided ARCSR predator physiology data with the clinical distance his integration counselor had taught him. Bite force metrics, pursuit speed, sensory range, territorial mapping instincts. Mira provided human data like she was reading a recipe for something delicious and slightly illegal. We also invented a sport where 2 people stand in a roped square and punch each other in the face, until one of them falls down, she said, tapping notes into her tablet. We put it on screens and millions of people watch. Some people cry. From happiness. Kale stared at her. It is called boxing, she added. There are rules. You cannot bite. Your species had to make a rule against biting? We had to make a lot of rules against a lot of things. That's kind of our whole situation. The other students watched them from across the lab. Kale could feel their eyes, could smell the low-grade fear pheromones that every herbivore in the room leaked like a faulty valve. They were not afraid of him anymore. Or at least not only of him. They were afraid of the pair, the predator and the thing that tamed predators. On the fourth day of the project, Mira made a joke about humanity capacity, and Kale did something his species did not do in public spaces. He laughed. It came out wrong. It always came out wrong. Too many teeth involved. A sound, like someone had put gravel in a machine designed for a different purpose. Every student within 3 rows flinched. A Granthi child dropped her stylus. Mira did not flinch. She grinned at him with her blunt, useless human teeth, and her eyes did that thing human eyes did, where they got smaller and brighter at the same time. "Dude," she said, "we seriously need to work on your laugh." What a dude was. He ran it through his mental categories: threat, prey, obstacle, irrelevant. It did not fit in any of them. He decided it was not dangerous, and then immediately questioned that decision, because everything about this girl suggested that the categories themselves might be the problem. She clicked her pen twice and went back to typing. Kale went back to his data and carried the sound of that word in his chest for the rest of the day, turning it over like a stone he had found in a river, not sure yet whether it was valuable or just smooth enough to keep. The cafeteria on Orbital Academy Station Prith 9 served 340 students from 14 species, and somehow managed to make all of them equally miserable. The food was engineered for maximum nutritional compatibility and minimum flavor, which Mira dos Santos thought was the most honest thing about interstellar civilization. You could conquer the stars, but you could not make a good sandwich in a vacuum. She sat at table 14, far left wall, near the recycling chute that made a grinding noise every 9 minutes. It was the table no one wanted, which made it perfect, which made it theirs. Kale sat across from her, eating something gray and protein-dense, with the careful jaw movements of someone who knew his eating was being monitored for signs of aggression. This was the most middle school thing about the galaxy. The tables, the invisible lines, the way everyone sorted themselves into clusters that pretended to be about preference, but were really about fear. Mira had seen it on Earth. She had seen it on the transport station. She was seeing it here, 12,000 light-years from where she was born, and the sameness of it made her chest tight in a way she did not look at directly. She clicked her pen instead. 2 months into the academic cycle, and the social map of the cafeteria was set in stone. Herbivores at the center tables, safety in numbers, insectoids near the windows, drawn to the light, mid-tiers scattered through the gaps, and Mira and Kale at table 14, alone together, which was a different kind of alone than just alone. It was a Tuesday when Fessy approached. Fessy was a Veldari student, insectoid class, about Mira's height but wider, with a hard exoskeleton the color of dark copper, and antennae that moved constantly, reading chemical signals in the air, the way humans read facial expressions. She was mid-tier in the social hierarchy, and she walked to table 14 with the careful steps of someone crossing a bridge they were not sure could hold their weight. She stopped at the edge of the table, and her antennae went flat against her skull, which Mira had learned meant anxiety. "I need to tell you something," Fessy said, and her voice had that clicking undertone that Veldari voices got when their mandibles were tense. "Sit down," Mira said. Fessy did not sit. "The senior cycle Arxer students have noticed," Fessy said, "Kale sitting with you. In Arxer social structure, proximity to a non-predator species, it signals submission. They are saying he has lowered himself." Kale stopped eating. His jaw went still, and his golden eyes fixed on a point somewhere past Fessy's shoulder, focused on nothing, which Mira had learned was how he looked when he was building a wall inside himself. "Sit down, Fessy." Mira said again. Fessie's antennae twitched. She looked at the empty chair. She looked at the cafeteria full of students who were absolutely watching. She looked at the copper-colored reflection of her own face in the table surface. She sat. Lunch became 3. Mira did not talk about why this mattered. She did not explain the warm thing that moved through her ribs when Fessie's exoskeleton clicked against the chair. She pulled out her data tablet and asked Fessie about her homeworld's atmospheric composition, because Fessie was the kind of person who loved being asked about atmospheric composition, and Mira was the kind of person who had learned very young that the fastest way to make someone feel safe was to let them talk about the thing they loved. She had learned that from their mother. She clicked her pen. Twice. 3 times. The plastic was wearing smooth under her thumb. Her mother had been a xenobiologist on the contact fleet. Had been. Past tense. 2 words that contained an entire collapse that Mira carried in her bag next to the first aid kit. Protein bars, and the field manual she was not supposed to have. She did not talk about it. She clicked her pen, and she asked people about atmospheric composition, and she kept her hands busy, and she did not talk about it. The corridor incident happened 3 days later. Mira was not there when it started. She was in the library, reviewing Arxer territorial behavior for the project, reading about dominance displays and hierarchy challenges, and thinking about how exhausting it must be to belong to a species where your lunch seating was a political statement. She found Kale in the maintenance corridor behind the biology lab. He was sitting on the floor with his back against the wall and his 6 limbs drawn in close to his body, taking up less space than something his size should take up. There was a crack in one of the scales along his jaw. The dark gray surface had split, and beneath it was something raw and pale. Mira did not ask what happened. Not ask, because asking would require him to say it, and saying it would make it a thing that happened to him instead of a thing that was already behind him. And she had learned, from a source she did not name, that sometimes the kindest thing you could do for someone was to skip the story and go straight to the wound. She sat down beside him and pulled the first aid kit from her bag. It was a human-rated kit, which meant it was designed for a species that broke so often and so thoroughly that wound care was practically a cultural tradition. Adhesive sutures, antiseptic that burned on contact, compression bandages, a protein bar, and a small tube of something called neosporin, that Mira was fairly certain could survive the heat death of the universe. She held up the surgical tape. "Can I?" Kale looked at the tape. He looked at her hands. His golden eyes moved across her face in that predator-stan way that used to make her skin prickle, and now just felt like Kale. He tilted his jaw toward her. Mira pressed the antiseptic pad to the cracked scale, and Kale hissed, a low sound that resonated in his chest. She worked the tape across the split with fingers that were steady because she had decided they would be steady. "You carry wound supplies," Kale said. "I am human. We break constantly. It is sort of our whole thing. This adhesive is not rated for Arxer tissue. It is rated for holding things together. That is close enough." He was quiet while she finished. The tape looked absurd on his dark scales, a small pale strip of human engineering, stuck to the jaw of something that could bite through metal. It was ridiculous. It was the most important thing Mira had done in weeks. She did not know this. She would not know this for a long time. But in Arxer behavioral science, allowing another being to touch your jaw was not a casual act. The jaw was the primary weapon, the seat of dominance. Someone touch it while you were wounded was an act of trust so deep it did not have a word in most Arxer dialects. The closest translation was something between surrender and sacred. Kale did not tell her this. He sat on the corridor floor with human tape on his face and watched the girl put her first aid kit back in her bag and pull out a protein bar and break it in half and offer him the bigger piece. "It tastes like cardboard," she said. but cardboard with vitamins. He took it. That evening, Instructor Ven Solari sat in her office and reviewed the cafeteria surveillance footage from the past week. She watched Table 14. She watched the Veldari girl sit down. She watched the three of them eat lunch together, the predator and the human and the insectoid. And she watched the way the space around that table had changed, how it was no longer a quarantine zone, but something else, something that had a gravity. Footage. She watched the human girl tape the predator's jaw. She opened a new report and addressed it to the Galactic Education Board. Her 4 hands moved across the keyboard, and she typed the subject line. And then she stopped. Her hands hovered. The cursor blinked. She thought about the seating chart she had built with such care. The buffer zones, and the species codes and the compatibility tiers. She thought about how all of it, every calculation, every precaution, had been designed to keep things separate. She thought about Table 14. She typed the subject line. Unanticipated social bonding. Recommend observation, not intervention. She hit send before her 4 hands could change her mind. The atmospheric seal on Deck 7 failed at 14:07 station time, and it was not a drill. The alarm started as the standard 2-tone pulse that played during practice evacuations, the sound every student had learned to treat with the same seriousness they gave to breakfast announcements. Then, the tone changed. A third note, lower, longer, and the overhead lights shifted from white to amber, and Instructor Ven Solari felt her double hearts lock into a rhythm she had only ever read about in emergency training manuals. The bulkheads came down. They dropped from the ceiling like guillotine blades, sealing Deck 7 into compartments. Ven was in the corridor between the biology lab and the main hall when the steel wall slammed into the floor 3 meters in front of her, and she hit it with all 4 hands, and the metal did not care. On the other side of that wall, 11 students were trapped in the biology lab. Ven pressed her communication badge. This is Instructor Solari. I have students sealed in Lab 7. What is the status of atmospheric containment? The station AI responded with the calm disinterest of something that did not breathe. Deck 7 atmospheric seal compromised. Repair crew estimated arrival in 40 minutes. Current oxygen levels in Lab 7 are declining. Estimated breathable air at current occupancy, 30 minutes. 40 minutes to fix it. 30 minutes of air. Ven's 4 hands pressed flat against the bulkhead, and she felt the cold of it through her skin. Inside the lab, the amber light turned everything the color of something burning. 11 students. 4 herbivore juveniles from 3 species. 3 Veldari insectoids including Thessi. 2 mid-tier omnivores. 1 Arcser cub. 1 human girl. The herbivores did what herbivores do when the world closes in. They froze. Their bodies locked rigid, and their eyes went wide and their breathing became shallow and fast, burning through oxygen like it was going out of style, which in this case, it literally was. The insectoids clustered. Thessi and the other 2 Veldari pressed together until their exoskeletons clicked, forming a single unit, conserving heat and reducing individual oxygen consumption through synchronized breathing. It was instinct. 10 million years of hive evolution, solving the problem the same way it always had. Together. Kale went still. Not frozen the way the herbivores were frozen, a different kind of still. The stillness of something that had been built by evolution to wait in dark places until the perfect moment. His breathing slowed to almost nothing. His golden eyes tracked the room in slow sweeps. He was conserving everything. Mira dos Santos stood in the center of the lab and clicked her pen. Once, twice, then she stopped clicking and started counting. 11 of us, she said, and her voice cut through the amber light with an edge. That did not sound like a 12-year-old girl. 4 Thyraxi, 3 Veldari, 2 Granthus, 1 Arcser, 1 human. Thyraxi and Granthi breathe the most oxygen per cycle. Veldari breathe the least. We have 30 minutes of air, and we need 40. She looked at the room the way her mother used to look at a specimen, not with fear, but with the specific intensity of someone who intended to solve it. Thessie, can your cluster slow your breathing further? Thessie's antenna vibrated. We can enter low cycle state. It would reduce our oxygen intake by approximately 60%. Do it, Gren, Piltha, Sosi. She pointed at the herbivore students who were standing like statues made of panic. I need you to sit down. Sit on the floor, close your eyes, and breathe through your noses only. Slow as you can. Count to 4 on each breath in, and 6 on each breath out. Can you do that? The Thyraxi girl named Gren blinked. Her 4 arms were shaking. I cannot. You can. It is just counting. You are good at counting. I have seen your math scores. Gren sat. The others followed, not because the fear was gone, but because the girl with the pen had given them something to do with it. Mira turned to Kale. I need you to break something for me. Kale's golden eyes focused on her. His claws extended, not in threat, but in readiness, and the sound of them sliding out was a small sharp click that made every herbivore in the room flinch. Mira pointed at the maintenance panel on the far wall. It was bolted shut with 4 heavy-gauge fasteners designed to keep students out of the station's secondary systems. Arcs or claws, she said, designed for tearing. Can you get that panel open? He was across the room in 3 strides. His claws hooked under the panel edge, and he pulled, and the metal screamed and bent, and the bolts popped like buttons off a shirt. The panel came away in his hands, and behind it was a mess of conduits and wiring and one very important valve. Secondary air supply, Mira said, and she was already beside him, her small human hands reaching into the tangle of machinery with a certainty that came from somewhere deeper than the moment. Her mother's field manual, page 114, Emergency Atmospheric Rerouting in Sealed Compartments. She had read it on the transport to Prith 9. She had read it the way she read everything her mother had left behind, with the desperate attention of someone memorizing a voice they could no longer hear. She did not think about this now. She thought about the valve. The secondary air supply was a backup system designed to feed oxygen to sealed compartments during maintenance lockdowns. It was not connected to Lab 7 because Lab 7 was a teaching space, and teaching spaces were not considered high priority during emergencies. But the conduit ran through the wall behind the maintenance panel, and the valve controlled it was mechanical, not digital, which meant it did not need the station AI's permission to open. It needed hands. Mira's fingers found the valve and turned it, and nothing happened. She turned harder. Her arms shook. The valve was designed for maintenance workers with tools, not for a 12-year-old girl with a pen in her hair. Kale. He was there. One clawed hand wrapped around the valve beside her fingers, careful not to touch her skin. And they turned it together, and the metal groaned and gave, and air. It hissed through the conduit with a sound like the universe exhaling, and the amber light flickered, and somewhere in the walls the atmospheric sensors registered the change, and the station AI updated its estimate. Breathable air, 38 minutes, 39, 42, enough. Ven heard it through the comms. She heard the hiss of air, and then a sound she could not immediately identify. It was Thessie. Clicking. Not the anxiety click. The other one. The one Veldari made when something they thought was lost came back. Mira, Ven said into the comm. Status. We are fine, Mira said, and her voice was steady, still that operational calm, but underneath it, Ven could hear something fraying. Air supply is rerouted. Everyone is breathing. We are fine. You did that? Kale opened the panel. I found the valve. Thessie kept the Veldari in low cycle. Gren counted her breaths. Everyone did it. The bulkhead lifted 16 minutes later, and Ven stepped through and found 11 students alive in a room that smelled like recycled air and adrenaline. Mira was sitting on the floor with her back against the lab bench. Her pen was in her hand, but it was cracked. The blue plastic split down the middle, where she had gripped it too hard. There was a thin line of blood on her palm, where the broken edge had cut her. She was staring at the pen, the room, not at the students she had just guided through a situation that would have killed half of them without her. At the pen. The broken pen. The pen that had been in her hair every day since she arrived, that she clicked when she was thinking, and clicked when she was not thinking, and held like it was the last solid thing in a station full of vacuum. Ven did not ask about the pen. She understood displacement when she saw it. That evening the station commander called Ven to his office. He was a Granthi, tall and broad and built for gravity wells that would crush most species. He reviewed the incident report with the expression of someone counting things that could have gone wrong. "What is the human student's integration threat level?" he asked. Ven stood before his desk with all four hands clasped behind her back. She thought about the question. She thought about the word threat. She thought about a girl sitting on the floor with a broken pen, blood on her palm, who had kept 11 people alive by knowing what to do and doing it without hesitation. "She is the integration," Ven said. The commander looked at her for a long time. Then he marked the file and closed it, and Ven walked back to her quarters and sat in the dark and thought about what it meant to be a prey species in a universe where the most dangerous thing in the room was also the thing that saved everyone in it. Kale Vreth had 17 words in his native language for ally of convenience. He had 41 words for subordinate, 9 for rival, 6 for blood enemy, 12 for prey, and each of those 12 carried a different shade of hunger. He had 0 words for what Mira dos Santos was. He had been trying to build one for weeks. He worked on it the way he worked on the project, with careful precision, and the growing awareness that the thing he was building was bigger than the container he had for it. The Arcsor language was designed for a species that understood the universe in terms of hierarchy. Who was above? Who was below? Who was useful? Who was consumed? There was no architecture in it for someone who sat beside you because they wanted to, who taped your cracked jaw with supplies meant for a softer species, who said dude like it was a name and a joke and a claim all at once. He tried combining existing words. Ally who stays. Not right. It implied obligation. Chosen packmate. Closer, but the Arcsur did not have packs, and the word for chosen carried a connotation of ownership. The human word was friend. He knew this because Mira used it. She used it casually, tossed it into sentences like it cost nothing, like it was not the most radical word Kale had ever encountered. My friend Fessy eats calcium supplements like candy. Can you tell my friend Kale that the library closes at 9? My friend. My friend. Each time she said it, Kale felt something rearrange in his chest. Some internal architecture shifting to make room for a structure that his species had never built. He did not tell her any of this. He was Arcsur. They did not talk about the shapes their feelings made. They especially did not talk about it when those shapes were new and did not fit any of the 41 words for the things they were supposed to feel. The end-of-term presentation ceremony arrived the way all important things arrive. Too fast, and with terrible lighting. R.P. The auditorium on Station Prith 9 held 300 seats, and every one of them was filled. Representatives from 12 species, faculty from 6 academic divisions, 2 members of the Galactic Education Board who had traveled 4 days to attend because the integration program was either a breakthrough or a disaster, and they needed to decide which before the budget review. Kale stood backstage with Mira and tried to remember how to breathe at a rate that would not alarm the herbivores in the front row. You okay? Mira asked. She had a new pen, blue, like the old one. She had gotten it from the station supply office the day after the Deck 7 incident, and she held it the same way, clicked it the same way. But sometimes her thumb paused over the spot where the old one had cracked, and Kale watched her fingers hesitate, and knew that she was touching a ghost. I am adequate, he said. That is the most Arcsur sentence ever. Thank you. It was not a compliment. I am choosing to receive it as one. This is a skill I learned from humans. She grinned, that blunt-toothed eye-crinkling, completely non-threatening grin that somehow threatened to rearrange his entire understanding of what faces were for. They walked onto the stage. The auditorium was a wall of eyes, slitted and compound and round and rectangular, and every shape that evolution had devised for the task of watching. Kale felt them all. He felt the specific weight of Arxer eyes from the back rows, the senior cycle students who had watched his integration with the cold attention of predators observing something they did not yet have a category for. Draven was there, back row, last seat. His massive frame made the chair look like furniture for children. His eyes were fixed on the stage, and they did not blink. Kale looked away. Mira started the presentation. She used when she was performing calm. Not fake, not forced, but constructed, assembled from parts that included her mother's steadiness, and her own stubborn refusal to be the smallest thing in any room she occupied. She talked about human evolution, about the plains of Africa, where her species had learned to run, about the long hunts, the days-long pursuits, the patient, relentless following that had turned a soft-skinned primate with no claws and no venom into the apex predator of an entire planet. She talked about it with the cheerful horror that was her signature. The audience laughed when she described boxing. They went silent when she described persistence hunting. They leaned forward when she talked about the wolves. Kale took over for the Arxer data. He delivered it clean, clinical, stripped of the emotional charge that his species packed into every discussion of dominance and territory. He talked about conquest as survival strategy, about hierarchy as social architecture, about the Dominion's expansion as an evolutionary inevitability that the ceasefire had interrupted but not erased. He was honest about the teeth. The audience appreciated this in the way audiences appreciate honesty, with discomfort and respect in equal measure. Then they reached the thesis. Mira had written it. Kale had edited it. Thessie had reviewed it for cross-species clarity. It had taken them 3 weeks and 4 arguments, and 1 incident where Mira had thrown her pen at the wall hard enough to leave a mark. Mira read it. Every species in this room evolved to survive. That is not special. Survival is the minimum. What makes a species dangerous is not what it can kill. It is what it refuses to lose. She paused. The auditorium was still. Humans did not become apex predators because we were strong. We are not. We did not become apex predators because we were fast. We are not. We became what we are because we decided that certain things belonged to us, and we refused to let them go. We chose wolves. We chose fire. We chose the dark places and the deep water and the sharp things that cut us. And we said, yes, these are mine now. She looked at Kale. A glance. Less than a second, but he felt it like a hand on his jaw. Our persistence is not physical. It is social. We choose our pack, and once we have chosen, we do not stop. We do not let go. The thing that is ours does not get left behind. Silence. The kind of silence that has weight, that presses against the walls and the ceiling and the inside of every ribcage in the room. Then Draven stood. The auditorium tensed, the way any room tenses when the largest predator in it moves. 300 bodies shifted, leaned, calculated distance. 2 education board members gripped their armrests. A Phyraxi faculty member's 4 hands went rigid. Draven walked down the center aisle. His footsteps were heavy and deliberate, each one a small earthquake in the auditorium floor. His claws were retracted, but the sheaths were visible, dark ridges along fingers thick enough to crush bone. He was enormous, nearly twice Kale's size, his scales darker, his jaw wider, his presence the kind of thing that rearranged rooms just by existing in them. Kale's claws extended. Instinct. He did not choose it. His body chose it. The way prey animals choose flight, and predators choose readiness, and humans choose whatever the hell humans choose when something big is walking toward them. Mira did not move. She stood at the podium with her new blue pen in her hand, and watched the senior Arxer approach, and she did not move. Draven reached the front of the auditorium. He stopped. His golden eyes, darker than Kale's, moved from the projection screen to Mira to Kale. He looked at the data, the human data, the persistence predator data, the wolves. He looked at Mira, small and soft and bandaged somewhere under that uniform. Always bandaged, always healing, always breaking, and coming back denser. He looked at Kale, at the faint line on his jaw, where a cracked scale had healed under a strip of human surgical tape. Something moved behind Draven's eyes. Not understanding, not warmth. Something more complicated. Something that looked like the first crack in a wall that had been standing for a very long time. He turned to the front row. He sat down. The seat he chose was the one directly in front of Kale. The seat no other student had wanted. The seat with a predator at its back. He sat in it and faced forward and did not say a word. The auditorium released a breath it did not know it had been holding. Mira clicked her pen, twice. Then she looked at Kale, and the corner of her mouth did something that was not quite a smile, and not quite a tremble, but was entirely, unmistakably hers. Kale retracted his claws, looked at Draven's back, at the seat that was no longer empty, at the choice that had just been made in front of 300 witnesses by the largest predator in the room. He understood. Not everything, not the full shape of what was happening, but enough. Enough to know that the word he had been trying to build for weeks, the word his language did not have, the word that meant chosen and kept and mine in a way that had nothing to do with hierarchy, that word had just grown by one. In the faculty balcony above the auditorium, Instructor Ven Solari sat with a data tablet on her lap, and all four hands still. She had started the term certain of one thing, that humans were the most dangerous species in the Galactic Integration Program. She had been right, not for any of the reasons she had expected. Not the endurance, not the healing bones, not the capsaicin, or the boxing, or the wolves. The danger was the choosing, the insufferable, irrational, world-rearranging insistence on choosing who belonged, and then refusing, with every cell and every breath and every cracked blue pen, to let go. Ven saved her end-of-term evaluation. She typed the title, Integration Outcome, Cohort 7, Station Prith 9. Her four hands hovered over the keyboard. She added a subtitle, or, What Happens When You Let the Persistence Predator Pick Its Own Seat. She saved the file and closed her tablet, and sat in the dark above the auditorium, and listened to the sound of 300 people applauding something they did not fully understand, but could feel in their bones. Below her, at the front of the stage, a human girl with a blue pen clicked it twice, and turned to the Arxer boy beside her, and said something Ven could not hear. But Kale laughed. It still sounded like gravel in a machine. But this time, nobody flinched.